Gluten, why all the fuss? Normally, our small intestine looks like the old 1950s shag rug with lots of loops. There are invaginations and loops, and this gives us a robust surface area so that we can have quality digestion. Some people have problems with gluten-containing foods, which make this shag rug now look like a tile floor. And once that happens, we don't digest as well. So why would plants, wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and oats, they can be contaminated with it? Why would they even have gluten? It turns out that the family of proteins, of which gluten is one, called gliadins and glutenins. This family of proteins exists in plants to act like a kryptonite. And in the wild, it wards off insects and animals from eating it. Well, why would that be? Because inside the gut, it's very hard to break these proteins down. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Steel Magnolias, where Olivia Dukakis says, what separates us from the mammals is our ability to accessorize. Well, what doesn't separate us from many of the other mammals is our inability to seem to digest gluten. Anyone who takes in a gluten, there's a little bit of an inflammatory response at the gut lining that most of us, when we're healthy enough, can handle. So if we're 18 and we have no stress, if we're like 31 and all life is zooming zen-like along, we can consume gluten foods without an issue. But when we have enough either genetic glitch or we're triggered to have an autoimmune reaction, or whether there's just enough stressors going on in our life, then that inflammatory wallop just starts to add up. So we do know that every single person that consumes gluten gets a little bit of an inflammatory wallop, but not everybody has an issue with this. And at that point, cytokines and interleukin-6 and different molecules of inflammation are released, and some people can handle it and other people can't. So you can have a whole continuum of reaction of responses if you can handle that inflammatory response. It could be that you have a wheat allergy, a wheat intolerance. If it's an autoimmune response, you can have what's called celiac disease, which is an autoimmune reaction where these proteins cross-react with the small intestine, especially in the duodenum, and actually cause a lot more of that tile floor. But you can also have non-celiac gluten enteropathy. Enteropathy means illness of the GI tract. It's specifically of the small intestine, but now we even say it to regard all the areas of the GI tract. We now know that people can not have a specific autoimmune reaction, but still have a lot of problems with their GI tract. And now we're even seeing infiltrating lymphocytic colitis, so the colon can be involved with gluten. We do know that the plant has gluten in it in the wild to keep animals away, but our gut doesn't have such a great time digesting it. A healthier gut does a great time with it, but now with more hybridization of wheat, more gluten-containing wheat, and perhaps more antibiotics and a variety of different other environmental triggers, more of us are having an issue with gluten. There's been different studies where they have saved blood samples over decades and shown that several decades ago, people made less antibodies to gluten than they do now. We do know that the incidence of reaction to gluten, even of the autoimmune reaction like celiac disease, is increasing very much. And we're even seeing people who don't have autoimmune reactions saying that their irritable bowel syndrome, their diarrhea, gas and bloat and intestinal pain gets better when they avoid gluten-containing foods, even if they don't have a diagnosable illness. So it's here to stay in the news. It makes a lot of sense if you're not getting well from any kind of condition to consider it, certainly if you have an intestinal condition. And it makes a lot of sense to be tested to see if you might have any along that continuum problem with gluten, but know that not everybody who tests negative, meaning they don't seem to have a problem based on a test, if they avoid gluten in their diet and they get better, there's a reality to that too. But of course, grains contain a lot of fermentable sugars. They have a lot of polyglycols. And when we remove those out of the diet, so there's less fermentation in the gut, a lot of people with intestinal issues get better. That's why the paleo diet now is so really popular, because it's removing a lot of those fermentable sugars. So there's every which way that you can look at improving yourself. You want to get tested before you have to do a huge dietary change of going off gluten. But a lot of times, even if you test normal, you still can be benefited by going off gluten. In the wild, Wild, it's kryptonite, but you don't want it to be kryptonite in your gut. So it makes sense to work with a really great nutritionist, because if you have problems and you go on other foods, you want to make sure you don't develop nutritional deficiencies by certain avoidances. You want to do everything in a sensible manner. But the gut is where the health begins, and so you want to make sure you're eating friendly foods, not foe. Is gluten your friend or your foe? Find out.